Okay, this is the second half of chapter 10, which is sections 10.4, 10.5, and 10.6. So 10.4 is about genetically modified food. That just means that it has in some way been changed from its original species variation. Like we looked at the stuff about corn or whatever. It could be through artificial selection. It could be through domestication, anything along those lines. People tend to think that genetically modified food is always referring to something that has been genetic engineered, which is like in the lab it's been created. But, you know, the making of corn or cotton or potatoes is also considered a genetically modified food. This is part of the whole field of biotechnology, so you should know what that encompasses. There are a lot of benefits to GM crops. Oftentimes they are tastier. They've had something inserted to make them taste better. They can have higher yields. Sometimes they can have better nutrition. I didn't write that on there, but I should. They can be drought resistant. They can be pest or pesticide resistant. So these are all good things. And then I wanted to talk about food irradiation. Sometimes that is something that we do after the fact to keep food longer. So before food is at a processing plant, it will be irradiated to kill bacteria and funguses that are living on it, just so that it lasts longer. So you should know this term biotechnology. You should know what recombinant DNA is. That's right here. That just means recombining DNA from different organisms. Genetic engineering, what a genetically modified organism is, or GMO, and what the term transgenic means. And so transgenic means that a gene is transferred between species. So that is called a transgene. Some of this stuff happens naturally, like mutagenesis. Some of it happens in the lab through gene editing. So it could mean a lot of different things. You should know this figure and caption, which talks about a couple different things. This is recombinant DNA, where you take a piece of DNA from something and you splice it into what's called a plasmid over here in another organism. And so the plasmid DNA, it has its own separate DNA. It lives inside of something. It will have that transgenic gene. And sometimes, depending on what type of plasmid it is, sometimes it will be passed on and sometimes it won't. This is gene editing, where you are actually editing the DNA of the organism itself. And that has only recently become possible. One of the main ways that people do that now is called CRISPR. So you should know this term, CRISPR. And it's right here, kind of the description of it. And it has recently become very powerful. People think that they may be able to eventually edit genes in humans to get rid of disease and things like that. Over here on this page, you should look at and know several examples of some famous genetically modified foods. The most famous one that is talked about a lot is golden rice. It was engineered to produce vitamin A inside of the rice because there is a vitamin A deficiency in a lot of Asian countries and children were going blind. And so this is a huge success story, has changed the nutrition of millions of people and prevented blindness in millions of people. GM salmon or BT corn, all of these, just pick a few and know several good examples. All right, then when we turn to page 258, there's kind of a lot here. I put no figure in caption. This is basically the main GM crops by type. So 50% are soybeans and so on. So soybeans, corn, and cotton are the vast majority. And then this is GM crops by nation. So the U.S. is we use the most GM crops. And then Brazil and Argentina are next. There are a lot of positives, like I said, to GM food. They require less pesticides because the crops are bred with pesticide inside them. And that can be either inside like the stalk of the plant or something like that. It's not necessarily in the food part that you eat, but it will emit that pesticide and keep bugs away from it or other types of pests, fungus or bacteria. It's better nutrition in developing countries because it's nutrients are bred into the crops, like I said, golden rice. And then they can also be drought resistant or salinity resistant plants. So when there's been environmental degradation or soil degradation, sometimes the plants can still grow there. And then I put a star here because these are some important things that more positives. You should know some things off of this bulleted list. On the flip side of that, there are a lot of issues with genetically modified food as well. Number one being that it is a big business, and big businesses are dominating the food supply, and that is threatening the independence of small farmers and local farmers. Companies like Monsanto and Bayer and some others put patents on their seeds, and then if their seeds are found in a farmer's field and that farmer hasn't paid for that crop, then they can be charged a lot of money, and it has forced a lot of people out of business. So that's what I'm saying here about the GM pollen can spread into non-GM fields. Additionally, some people say that this is, a giant experiment with no controls and that we are being experimented on. I think that's a little alarmist. There is currently, I underline this over here, no study so far has shown clear evidence that there are human health impacts from any GM food. And they've been looking, a lot of people have been looking because a lot of people are against it for various reasons, but they haven't really found any clear evidence. Another issue is that it decreases food biodiversity. Instead of a lot of different types of carrots, say, there's only one type of carrot, that big orange carrot that you can get at the grocery store. And they are finding, this is another, actually, it's down here, stuck at the bottom, but it's very major. A lot of weeds are evolving resistance to herbicides. So we've got that up here where I put no figure and caption. So weeds are evolving this resistance because they are getting sprayed. Just like we talked about the treadmill for pesticides, weeds are also getting sprayed, and they are the ones that, survive are the ones that breed, and so that trait is passed on to the next generation. This is showing the spread of another type of resistance, glyphosate, which is what the main ingredient in Roundup. And so if you look, initially there wasn't a lot of glyphosate resistance, and now it's throughout the whole of the Midwest and into the South. All right, if we turn to page 260, there's a pretty good article or, science behind the story here about GM crops and the impacts, although some people argue with this study's methodology. You should know the idea of the precautionary principle, and this is that maybe we shouldn't, this is the Jurassic Park movie idea. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So it says the idea that one should not undertake a new action until its ramifications are well understood. So public debate over GMOs keeps going. There's all kinds of things going on. People want labels on GMOs, and the European Union and Japan and some other nations have mandated that there be labels on anything that is genetically modified. That is not the case in the US, although certain states have mandated that. But so the argument there is people say that everybody has the right to know whether they're eating a genetically modified food or not, versus the other side, which says that this is just a scare tactic. And since, nothing has been proven to harm people, that there's no need to label it. And that is decreasing, farmer profits. The other debate, again, like I said, is that it is a big business. Small farms are being put out of business because these corporations are patenting their genes. And there's even an argument about whether something like a gene can be patented. And so that's a big debate on GMOs. We turn to 262. Now we're in section 10.5, which is about organic agriculture. Should know what organic agriculture is. It doesn't mean that nothing is put on the crops. It just means that there's no synthetic fertilizers or pesticides or hormones or antibiotics. So everything is relying on a biological approach. But you can use biological pesticides, and there are pesticides on organic agriculture, and they are not as readily, they're not regulated as much as some conventional agriculture is. So sometimes, there's this idea that organic agriculture is so safe, but there are definitely some pesticides on there that are not good for people. You should know the Organic Food Production Act, which was in 1990, and that's under here. Actually, it's right here. And you should know the provisions. And so this is for crops to be considered organic. what types of things need to go on. So you need to have no prohibited substances for 3 years, and things like that. There are definitely benefits to organic farming in terms of soil health is the number one. There's more topsoil when people do organic farming. There's not a lot of erosion. They do less tilling and that kind of stuff. There are more microbes in healthy soil because they don't use as much synthetic pesticide. Takes less energy and it produces less greenhouse gas. So that all sounds, really good, but there are some drawbacks, which we'll talk about in a second. And then this is what I was saying over here, some of the provisions that you need to know. No genetic modifications and no synthetic pesticides or fertilizers. One of the main drawbacks to organic food is the price. It can be 10 to 30% more expensive, sometimes even more than that, for something that is nutritionally no different. And so some people consider it a scam, but it's just up to you if you want to spend your money on that kind of thing. I say that, you vote with your wallet, and what you support monetarily is what's going to happen. Organic agriculture is on the rise. There is an argument here, though, in this subsection about can it feed the world? Can we get enough yield from organic agriculture to feed the 8 billion people that live on our planet? And they talk about that. I'll come back to this page. They talk about that here, where they bring up the fact that only about 43% of the crops on the planet right now are to feed people. The rest goes to livestock and biofuel. So if we converted some of those back to food crops for humans, we might well be able to feed people with organic agriculture. Going back to the science behind the story is about how productive it is. And you should kind of know these. There was a study done comparing conventional, which is the orange, to organic, which is this red color. And you can see that the yields are almost identical. The profit, though, is a lot greater for farmers when they do organic farming because you charge a lot more. The energy input was less, and the greenhouse gases were less. So that study does seem to indicate that organic is better in some respects. But there's a lot of studying left to be done. The last section, 10.6, is on sustainable food production. Remember, the term sustainable just means that you can do it indefinitely. You are not degrading any of your resources or running out of any of your resources. One method of sustainable food production is local agriculture, locally grown foods. So these support local farmers and local economies. So you are not sending your money to another state or another country. There is less air pollution because the food is not being transported as far. It doesn't get put on a truck and driven 3,000 miles in order to get to the grocery store. And it is also in season, which means that it is fresher, has more nutrition in it. So these are all benefits to locally grown food. Some examples of this are farmers markets. So if you ever shopped at a farmers market, not all of them are locally grown. Sometimes you go to a farmer's market and they have like bananas and pineapples and you're like, I don't know any farms around here that grow those. But you can ask and they will always tell you what is local. You can do something called a CSA, which means community supported agriculture. You get a box from the farm every week or every 2 weeks or something like that of whatever they're growing at that time. So you pay up front and then you get food all season long. Sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes it's 3 months. But you basically are investing in the farm, and then you take your dividends, so to speak, in terms of food. Another example of locally grown food is rooftop gardens or farms. This would be in urban areas. There are a lot of places that are converting their rooftops to what are called green roofs or, urban agriculture. Under here, though, it talks about remembering your ecological footprint. So local food has a much lower ecological footprint than conventional agriculture, where maybe your avocados are being shipped in from Mexico or something like that. Another sustainable food production that is becoming popular now is hydroponics. So this is not just for growing illegal substances that you may have heard about, but you can grow a lot of crops hydroponically. Here's a picture of them growing tomatoes. Hydroponic just means that it's without soil. So it can be grown in water, it can be grown in air. If it's grown in water, it's kind of like sitting in water and the nutrients just go past it and they get absorbed into the roots. If it's grown like aeroponically, the nutrients are actually just sprayed or misted onto the roots of the plant. And that's a benefit because you can grow things vertically and you can have like walls of food. So you should know some of these advantages. Less land is used, less water, and so on. But there are some drawbacks. The main drawback is the amount of energy that it uses. You have to, pump the water, you have to have electricity, you have to have grow lights and all of that kind of stuff. So it does take a lot of energy. Then finally, this last section basically says sustainable agriculture mimics natural ecosystems. So if we can get as close as we can to a natural functioning ecosystem, then that would be sustainable. And so there's an example here in this picture of a rice farm where they have all kinds of things going on. There's like ducks that live in the rice farm, and the ducks, in their paddling, they're actually oxygenating and aerating the water. Their manure is fertilizing the crop, so the farmer can get duck meat and eggs from that. There's fertilizer, oxygenation. They eat a lot of the bugs that would be pests for the rice. And then, there's some other parts to this. So they have the plant that's providing nitrogen for the rice. You've got fish and so on. So this is really like the food webs that we studied in the previous unit. And that's what you want it to look like if you want it to be truly sustainable. All right, so that's the end of chapter 10.